welcome to the Law Matters. Of course it does. Hi, I'm Debbie Moraes, your host and moderator. This program's been designed and created to help educate, inform, help you with law matters because the law matters. Understand the law better, and you're in a better position to protect yourself, your family, and your business. We provide information and resources that will help you decide whether or not you actually need or want to contact a lawyer. Perhaps we'll even help you determine whether or not you might be able to handle some issues entirely yourself. If you do decide that you want to contact outside professional counsel, you'll be better prepared, and of course, as a result, so will they. Either way, you'll be in a better position, hopefully save time, save money, and achieve better results. The partners from the Bazar Grasso Law Firm in East Providence continue to donate their time and their experience and their insights on the various topics that we tackle each session. Attorneys Jacqueline Grasso and David Bazar are our resources, and today with us is David Bazar.
Hi.
Welcome again, David.
Thank you.
So, I think we'll start with what serves as a springboard for our conversation today. There's a mishandled traffic accident on the afternoon of July 10th, and it quickly escalates and turns into a confrontation. There's an arrest, there's a jailing, there's a death. So the context of this, a white trooper waiting in his car just outside of Black University, drives up behind Sandra Bland. This is the springboard. Prompts her to move across, pulls her over. There's a confrontation. She ended up not complying initially because she had a single lane change without a turn signal. She ends up arrested, and we know the rest, that she died. Our topic today isn't about just this one case, but there's racism, there's police brutality, there's women in policing, there's even constitutional law. What are the proper protocols? For us, what do we need to know? What do you need to know? What do you expect from your police? How should we behave? This goes beyond just a single incident. There certainly are many, so let's start with, I guess I'm going to turn to David and say, there's even an issue right now about whether or not that police officer in that Sandra Bland case, whether or not that arrest was even constitutional. Did he violate a criminal law? You know that she just didn't use her turn signal initially.
So I guess we should start with the stop and whether the stop was a legal stop. And in that case, in any other case where there's a violation of the law, a police officer does have a right to pull you over as a result of that. Not using a turn signal almost, in this case, sounds like a pretext for a stop because most people, many people, don't use turn signals when they change lanes. It's just something that the law says you're supposed to do it, so is the officer justified in stopping you for doing that? Sure he is, because you can be stopped for any violation. So I would say initially the stop is legal. You'd have to give me more background on what happens afterwards to determine what happens next, whether there's any violations.
So as a few of these details, if we can flesh them out together, perhaps we can get to this idea. But when he pulls her over, she doesn't understand why she's being pulled over because she just sees that he comes up behind her. And she sees this, so she quickly switches lanes. And I guess perhaps didn't even think about a turn signal. She just wanted to get out of the way. But he comes up behind her and then says, here's the reason for being stopped. She doesn't really know that that's why she's being stopped. She challenges him. It escalates. There's a verbal interchange that's not pleasant and not fit for TV, but it was fit for YouTube, I guess.
Right.
So with that understanding that she didn't understand what was going on, couldn't it have just been like other traffic violations? They pull you over, they write you up, they give you a fine, and you're on your merry way.
So what often happens with a traffic stop is it's an opportunity for the police officer to determine whether there are any other violations. So let's just start with the general premise that most police officers do a good job and are out there to do their job.
Fair enough.
So based on that, what normally would be expected is that if an officer pulls you over and then asks you for information, you generally would comply with that request. What's the information the police officer can ask you for? License and registration, insurance card, that type of thing, on a traffic stop. So assuming that the only reason he had to pull her over in that instance would be to do that. And oftentimes, someone wants to know why you're being pulled over. I think the right protocol would be for the police officer to inform the motorist that they pulled over, this is why I pulled you over.
Simple.
It is. I actually had what I thought is, in retrospect, a pretty funny encounter one time up in New Hampshire, in a very small town in New Hampshire, on one of these winding roads that leads from the town back to 93. In a summer's day, people are riding their bikes on the road. There are hikers on the road on the sides, and I'm going in one direction in the road that goes in one lane, and a police officer from the small town's coming in the other direction. And a biker was in his lane, so he swerved into my lane. So I was able to get a little bit farther to the right off the road a little bit so we didn't hit and get by him, and then he turned back to his lane. So I'm watching him in my rearview mirror, and I see him turn around. So I check my speed to make sure I'm going the speed limit, and I watch him turn around and come up, put his lights on, and pull me over. So he pulls me over, and he says to me, do you know why I'm pulling you over? And of course I didn't, but the right thing would be to say no, but I was just a little upset because he had no reason to pull me over. So I said, if you don't know, why would I tell you?
You gave him a little lip.
A little bit. So he said, you were speeding. And I said, well, actually, no, I wasn't, because when you almost came into my lane and hit me and then went past me, I watched you turn around, so I checked my speed. And in fact, you were speeding because I was some distance ahead of you. I was doing the speed limit, and you caught up to me, so you had a speed to catch up to me. So he said, well, I'm going to let you off with a warning this time. And I said, and I'll do the same for you. So,
you gave him more lip.
Oh, yeah. But remember now, this really was an unwarranted stop, and I was totally in the wrong, and it's exactly what you shouldn't do. But here's the thing. There's not even a pretext for a stop in that case. So if he had any knowledge of the law and he was at all a decent police officer, he would know that he had no right to pull me over. And I think what happened in that case was he was a little shaken up by the fact that he had almost hit me in my lane. And perhaps he should have been pulling up to pull me over to thank me for getting out of his way. But be that as it may, my advice is, when you get pulled over, don't act like I did. Just be polite, give the officer what he or she asks for, and move on.
And of course, that makes sense, and in so many cases, that's exactly what happens. But of course, as we're talking about this case, and it is sort of not the tip of the iceberg, but there certainly are so many cases now where there may be a minority situation, minority woman, minority black, minority anything, and these conversations don't even go as well, relatively, as yours did. So this woman says, I don't know why. She probably has more of an attitude than you did. She is protesting being stopped, and she's a little bit insolent, and that ratchets up. Where is the onus? On him, as the police officer with more power than she, to back off and say nothing and not react to the bad mouth, bad language, bad attitude, and instead just stick to the script? Where's the onus? On him or her?
Well, the onus is on her.
Okay.
But as a good police officer, he should look at the situation, assess it for what it is, try to calm her down, assure her that he's just doing his job, and try to get her back down to a level that's acceptable. Because when she ratchets up the situation, and he then doesn't do anything to quell it, it can come out to a situation where you can now be arrested for obstruction, if you're obstructing the officer in his job. If you're asked to get out of the car and resist arrest, you can be charged with resisting arrest. There are a number of things that can happen, and none of them are good.
And what you're bringing up, actually, two incidents happened. Number one, he demands for her to put that cigarette out. Question one, is it legal for him to demand that she put that cigarette out? Or is that not a reasonable request or demand?
So that's an interesting question, because is it legal for you to smoke in your own car? I have to assume that it is in every state. And now, why is there any basis for him to do that? Well, the only thing I can think of is he may, for his own health not want the secondhand smoke coming out at him, or B, view it as a potential weapon that he could be burned with, perhaps, whether rightfully or wrongfully thinking that. So I guess the request is legal. I guess he can make that request. Whether or not she has to comply with it, I wouldn't think that there's any grounds in the law that says she has to, other than you're going to ratchet up the situation.
Right. And it seems that there must be, I'm sure that there is a protocol in place for any police officer to stop, arrest, detain and arrest someone. Asking them to please put out your cigarette, maybe so that you could reach over and pull out your license, I don't know, but asking, requesting is one thing, demanding another, and this did nothing but add fuel to the fire. So now that it's ratcheted up, point number 2 that you were alluding to, and step out of the car. So if this starts out as you didn't have a turn signal, I want you to put your cigarette out, it's a contentious situation. Does he have a legal right to say step out of the car? Based on what? Is that legal?
Well, I guess it's legal if she's not complying with his otherwise legal commands. And so what are the legal commands would be license and registration, insurance card, that type of thing. Now, if you don't comply with that, then the police officer could ask you to get out of the car because he could be concerned for his safety. Number one, I have somebody here who will not follow my directions and will not listen to me. So I think that an officer at that point can ask you to get out of your car. But what we're having here is a situation which I'm going to equate to deflated footballs, because you have two parties who are making an issue out of nothing. You have a turn signal violation. If you're going to write someone up for the turn signal violation, write them up, let them go on. That should be the end of the day. If the NFL had handled the deflated football situation in the same reasonable manner, if they would put on notice that, hey, this team might be using footballs that aren't inflated to the proper air pressure, then notify them that this is the championship football game you're playing in. We've had this complaint. We are going to be checking it, and we want to make sure you comply. That would be the end of the story. But they didn't handle that way. They almost were like an entrapment or looking to get somebody. If the police officer is looking to get somebody in that situation, and he gets somebody who's not willing to comply with his requests and orders, then the situation becomes way more than it should be, and that's what happened there.
So, you know, you're discussing what might be an A or a B situation. You have the power to do either one. You may not like one or two, but you have the power to do it. In any other situation, the police has the power to give a ticket, citation, or to arrest. In this case, he decided that, I guess he was going to give a citation, and before you know it, it becomes another story entirely. So I don't know that we don't know that he initially just and only was going to give that citation, but we do know that another element was here, is that it was on a camera. So at some point, we get to see what happens, and then suddenly, once she's out of the car, the officer is in a place to not let anything more be seen, or nothing more is seen. So we don't get to see all the rest, but we can hear some things. But technology, with the advent of technology, should actually make it a simpler case now of proof. There's proof of who did what, when, and where, and who's liable or whatever. In this case, this didn't end up solving a situation at all. It just ended up exacerbating it more. So right now, we have more and more police officers that have cameras on their eyeglasses, and more passengers who have a cell phone. Are these things both okay for your own protection and defense in each case?
Yes, so two things. First of all, you would hope that the cameras and the dashboard cameras on the officer would all serve to make policing better, because they know that they're being recorded. And again, my presumption at the beginning of the show was that let's just presume, because I do, that most officers are good officers.
Sure.
And so I think those officers would welcome the cameras and would want to do everything in front of the camera. I think if you're pulled over and you have a phone that can record, you have every right to record and tell the officer, you know, if you have some concern that I'd like to record this. And I've heard responses to that is, I think we should record it for both of our protection. And an officer I know has pulled over clients of mine before and has said, there's a camera in my car which is recording us for both of our protection. So I think that that can add to better situations rather than exacerbating them. But I can see with the bad seed, the bad cop, the bad person being pulled over,
Either way.
that they, one or the other says, I'm recording, ratchet it up. No, you can't record me. Well, what do you mean I can't record you? You're recording me. And just that thing escalating.
And of course, there have been other cases, and we know that there are good cops, bad cops, just to say good passenger, bad passenger, whatever. But when now we're looking at this technology to be proof of truth, then when you have so many cases right now where there is missing tape, like the Rosemary Woods of years ago, where did it go? Gee, it's a sensor error. And we've been seeing an awful lot of these things. So I guess of late, when we're hearing that more and more Americans are more concerned than ever about police impropriety, abuse of power, I don't know if you want to call it brutality. There is some of that, certainly, but in this one case that we're using as a springboard, there were enough institutional mishaps and problems that were unnecessary. Do you think that that has given more people a reason to say, I'm going to take this to court now? We're right now at the beginning of this session, I was saying, well, what's constitutional here? And beyond whether the arrest was legal, we're even having the question brought up about whether or not the family of this victim is going to be able to go to court.
Yeah, so I've had cases, and I know of cases where there has been conduct by police officers which violate somebody's constitutional rights. The officers are negligent in carrying out their duties as they're supposed to do them. And these things happen, and you do have a right to go to court on those things. In the case that you started us with, I have some more questions, bigger questions, rather than the stop as to, if I'm correct on this, why this woman ended up being held in a cell for 3 days?
That's the next part of this, yes.
And what is the basis for that? And why wasn't she let out on bail or personal recognizance or whatever it might be within 24 hours of having been pulled over and arrested? I don't understand why, unless it was over a weekend or something, what the basis, and even if it was over a weekend, in Rhode Island you could have a bail commissioner come to the police station and arraign somebody and let them out. I don't understand why this woman was held for that long. But as I was saying, there are a number of cases that exist out there where police officers have not done their job correctly, and as a result there have been lawsuits.
So if there's enough time, I really do want to talk about that incarceration portion. But what should a minority, woman, black, green, pink, orange, doesn't matter, if someone is arrested stopped, and they fear that there is some prejudice of whatever kind, and they don't think that they're getting fair shakes, and they're afraid to step out of the car, or what should they do, David? That puts everyone in a very untenable situation. The cop fearing that what happens if they do or if they don't. What do they do? Yeah,
so two things. One, keep calm. Two, follow the orders of the police officer. Be respectful. Don't give them any reason to think that you're a danger to them or that you're not going to listen. If you think that the stop was illegal, if you think that your treatment is wrong, you be the bigger person, do what you're supposed to do, and then worry about what you can do afterwards to make sure that the wrong that's being brought on you is brought to light. Don't try to correct it there, because that police officer, if he's already on a bad path and is doing wrong, is only going to make it worse, because he doesn't, obviously if he's already in a bad course, he's not going to get any better by you being disrespectful or not listening to him.
Pretty logical.
So that's the first thing you have to do. And know that if you do the right thing, and hopefully there is a recording, and hopefully, or maybe you can record it, you'll have a chance to have somebody else look at it higher up in the police department or an attorney or somewhere, and be able to bring to light what's being done that's wrong. And I know that there are folks, police officers, who don't do the right thing sometimes, sure. But you can't, as you said before, throw fuel on the fire and make it worse.
I know as we've been reading, we're talking about this one issue, but there have been certainly so many of late, even one, I think, this week with the Cincinnati police officer and being shot, which should not happen. What you're saying, David, sounds so very reasonable. I can see you maybe suggesting to a client, respect begets respect. It should happen on both sides. But when you are in the inferior position, sometimes it's hard for you to think about being the bigger person. You're adding heat more than light, and it's better that you keep cool. So right now, while so many families seem to be saying, we understand there's black and women facing brutality, they may be first or worst or whatever, but this is, what you bring up seems to be more of a human rights issue where people need to think about how to best handle situations so that these things don't happen, because clearly this got out of hand from the outset, from the citation, and now we started to talk about the arrest. What can an officer do at that point of arrest? Are they supposed to be able to ask you, are you suicidal? Are they supposed to check every body crevice to see if you've had drugs planted? Are they supposed to do blood work to see if you've had methamphetamine or been smoking pot? What happens at that courthouse? I mean at the jail, excuse me. Sorry.
Or the police station.
Police station, thank you.
So there is a requirement for a police station where they're holding people to go through a suicide checklist when they're going to hold somebody. And there is a printed, usually in most stations, checklist that they have to go down and do an assessment, which would include, has the person ever been arrested before? Because if it's the first time, maybe they're more likely to be nervous and upset by it and suicidal as a result. And there's a whole number of other sections in that form. Of course, they need to take precautions if they think there's a suicide risk. And what does that entail? Well, removing a belt, of course, and other things that can be used to harm yourself. So there is a requirement for the police station, the officers, to do something, to protect people who they're holding.
So suppose she did have pot 3 hours before. Maybe they can smell and don't even have to ask, but do they ask, and do you have to answer that?
No, you don't have to answer, and whether they ask or not, if you're not exhibiting symptoms of being under the influence of drugs or alcohol, it's hard to imagine that if somebody had ingested, or I guess smoked in this case, if that's what it was, marijuana,
yes,
or ingested some drugs, and they're not exhibiting any symptoms, that those substances are going to cause somebody to die while they're being held in prison a day or 2 or 3 days later. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is, to me, that's almost in that particular case a red herring as to what was going on. If there was marijuana in her blood system, I'd be more concerned if it's 3 days later when they find this, or 5 days later, whatever it is, how it got there. Because if she's being held that whole time, how does she get marijuana in her system? It's supposed to, as I understand it, work its way out after a number of hours or days.
That issue might be for another conversation or another topic. But even with the suicide issue, obviously she's hanged herself. This is suicide, ostensibly. But the family says, well, you should have asked, and I guess she had been suicidal several years ago because there was an incident in her life, and it was an unpleasant one, and perhaps she had those thoughts or feelings, whatever. But at the time, the circumstances that are presented by the family right now are challenging that it was even a suicide.
Right. And so that's 2 issues. One is, how was she, as I said, why was she still even there? But be that as it may, what precautions did they take to prevent her from killing herself? And if she didn't kill herself, how did she die?
When it's hanging, and then they're saying that she has had a history. I don't know if it was a history, but certainly now we have, never mind, is this a constitutional issue about the citation and the arrest? How about even the circumstances of her death right now? The other thing that we know is that she's had made several phone calls during the 3-day period where she's there, and on a couple of them she says she's roughed up. Well, she's already had a few interchanges with the police officers. What do you do if you're in jail and you feel like you're being roughed up and you are making a call and what do you do to not be roughed up? I mean, it shouldn't happen, obviously. That's got to be illegal. What recourse do you have? I'm sure she doesn't have her cell phone there so that she can record that going on. What's your protection? What do you do?
Yeah, there's not a lot there, but if there's a family member who knows that there's something going on and they went to an attorney and this woman hasn't been presented to a court for charges or anything, you could file a writ of habeas corpus, which is a writ to say, bring me literally the body, bring me the person, and have a judge order that person brought to court so you can have the police officers or whoever's holding her answer to the court as to why she's being held and why she isn't being released.
And if there are records of her phone conversations, apparently there are, because that's how we get to know that she's been roughed up, apparently some have some missing information. There's video apparently, and some of that now has missing information, and we're told that the jailhouse has something wrong with their sensors. I don't know who's right or who's wrong on all of this, but clearly there are some enormous gaps that have caused the police institution, such as it is, to lose a lot of credibility, which doesn't go a long way to making people feel comfortable about trusting their local police officers. When you have all of these items, not any one, but the cumulative effect of all of these items, how do you caution someone to behave such as you're saying? Always be cool, always give them the benefit of the doubt. There's a string here, and it's not just of this case, although we use this as the launch pad. How do you get to really deal with that? What are your thoughts about that, David?
Because you're in a situation where you have no control. So you just have to understand that and deal with it and know that at some point in time, if you do it and you get yourself through it, you're going to be able to address those issues civilly, perhaps. So for that family, if they bring a civil lawsuit, which it sounds like they may have good cause to do, or in general, part of the case, in my opinion, the way I would address this is that the police station, if they have missing data and there's things that they don't have that they should have and they can't be reasonably explained, then we would use a term called spoliation, which is that they've ruined or gotten rid of some evidence. And in Rhode Island, when you do that, there's a presumption that that evidence would have been helpful to the other side. That's why you got rid of it. And so if they don't have the video that they should have, and that video, the jury could then presume that that video would show that they were doing something that was inappropriate.
There's an intention, the implied intention of sorts. By
getting rid of it or not having an explanation as to why you don't have it, a reasonably logical explanation, a presumption can be drawn by the jury.
You know, we talked earlier about the fact that the advent of technology is going to make a difference here. And if you're a good cop and you're a good passenger, it should be helping both, just as you said. But even with this other point that you bring up, it certainly says that there's going to be some changes along in these, as we go along with these future cases about policing. We hope that this has been helpful to you. We've certainly tackled quite a few issues about the law. We hope it's been helpful. We hope you will continue to stay tuned to the Law Matters, because certainly it matters to you.